Welcome to the new season of the Live Your Spa Life show. The Spa in Spa Life stands for Seek Power Always, that divine power within you to do what you're here to do. The theme for this season is Freedom Fighter. Amazing people like you share ways to ensure your freedom physically, financially, spiritually, and in your relationships to create a world-class life. In these times of uncertainty, it's time for you to move past the distractions and start trusting yourself more through your God-given knowingness. No one truly knows better what's best for you than you. In this season, you'll have plenty of examples of people choosing their best life and giving a voice of freedom to those who are also looking to have their best life. Thank you for sharing your precious time with us and being part of the Live Your Spa Life conversation. With us today is Chris Tuff, a best-selling author and highly sought-after keynote speaker who has presented for Nike, Meta, Horizon, and Harvard. He began his career as a pioneer of the social media marketing space, becoming one of the first marketers to work directly with Facebook advertising. He's a graduate from Vanderbilt University and lives in Atlanta with his wife and 2 daughters. He loves kiteboarding, travel, and Jordan 1s. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
This is so great. Chris, your first book, The Millennial Whisperer, which is a USA bestseller, that explores the empathy and relationships in the workplace and equips people to be able to retain talent through genuine connection. I'd like to know, how is connection with millennials in the workplace, how's it different than other generations?
Sure. Well, there's 2 big factors in it. One is, and this is now 3 years since publishing a pandemic, and everything that I wrote in that is actually more true now than it ever was before. And one of the big pieces that I've been able to walk away with is the fact that the younger you get in the millennial set, so really mid-millennials, 35 to that 23-year-old into the Gen Zers, there's more of an expectations that passions will be itched within your organization's 4 walls. And what's happening is when those things aren't being itched, they're leaving, right? And the second piece that is happening is that, it's important to look at how millennials and Gen Zers were raised versus Xers and boomers, right? And it was I'm right on the cusp, but I had a British father. So I'm like, even though I'm 42, I was raised like someone in the 48 and older because my dad was very authoritarian, right? When we sat down at the dinner table, it was like, Christopher, how are the grades? Like, where are you going to go to school, right? You juxtapose that to like these mid-millennials to younger Gen Zers, they're playing beer pong out back. They're ripping on the Juul and they're talking about who they hooked up with last weekend. And what's happening is they're craving that same sort of relationship with their boss that they had with their parents. And so it's much more, they want their bosses to take a vested interest in their own lives, not just at work, but also their personal lives, asking them, how are they doing as people, right? And so you look at this tension that's happening and it creates kind of, I think, the perfect storm, but the solutions are right in front of us. And it all does come down to just authentic connection, right? It's not that complicated. And the one thing I run up against the most is just the mentality of, well, I had to do it this way. Why don't they? Right. And I'm not saying that millennials and Gen Zers have it all figured out, right? They, you look at like that interpersonal muscle, for example, they don't have a developed interpersonal muscle because it's underdeveloped because of the reliance on social media and digital, right? So it's up to us to help teach those things. But a lot of these things that I'm teaching and training around and doing keynotes on are pretty simple solutions that cost $0 to implement.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of those simple solutions? Because company culture has shifted in so many different ways. Like, what are some of the ways that like you can actually have an amazing company culture?
So the biggest things from a leadership perspective are transparency, autonomy, and it's inspirational leadership, transparency, and autonomy. Those are the top 3 leadership traits. We could break down any one of those, right? If you look at inspirational leadership, A lot of leaders think they're inspirational. And then you ask two people on the team, hey, is Bob inspirational? They're like, hell no, he's not. Right. And so there's a problem there. But I did some work with Tony Robbins on some stuff. And he was like, dude, Chris, you know what inspirational leadership is? It's the biggest issue is LAE. I was like, what's LAE? He goes, low ass energy. And I was like, oh my God, I love that. Right. How do we bring HAE? Right. And so the tactics I talk about are, when you're getting people together, play some music. There was an introverted dentist that I took under my wing, and he called me and he was like, Chris, I'm not inspirational. I'm an introvert. I like working on teeth all day. And I've got a whole crew of Gen Zers. How do I bring HAE? Right. And I was like, well, let's look at some of these tactics that you can use. Right. And I rattled off a couple. He was like, no, that's awkward. No, that's not me. And then we talked about music. And so we were like, well, what about do you have an all hands meeting? He goes, yeah, every Monday at 7:30. I was like, use music. He goes, oh my God, I got it. And he hangs up. 6 weeks later, he calls me and he's like, Chris, oh my gosh, I've been able to bring the HAE and it takes zero energy out of me. So what I do is I play Chaka Khan's Tell Me Something Good. And then that's everyone signed to go to the break room. And then they tell me something good that happened in their week. And then they start rewarding and recognizing each other. And it just sets the vibe for the week. Oh my God. Like, Trey, that is so awesome, right? And so any one of these traits, right, I think are both misinterpreted, but then also we forget very simple solutions and tactics that can help kind of get us to where we need to be.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and there's something different about having energy in the room in a workplace and people kind of bouncing ideas off of each other and having that kind of connection. Post lockdown type stuff is when people are doing a lot more remote work. So how's remote work affected like teamwork and connection and that energy?
It sucks. It sucks because no one knows how to adapt. And if you were to tell me I had to go to an office all day, every day, I'd say no way, right? Because I need to be with people, right? The last thing you want for me working for any organization is sitting at a desk, right? And so I think there's a couple, even as you look at work flexibility, that's the number one. You got leadership on that side, which we kind of just touched upon. Then you got organizational. Number one is work flexibility. So in work flexibility, we've got to adapt our interpretation of what that is. All right. And so even before we say this is the way it's going to be, you got to look at individual contributors. If they just want to work from their basement and, code, for example, and drink Mountain Dew, whether or not they're doing their job, let them do that. But as leaders, we got to bring people together, person to person on at least, I say, a monthly basis to get people aligned and connected again. And so the future of work that I kind of see unfolding before us is just more of a hive mentality. We've got to come together and then we go apart, and we come together and we go apart. We brainstorm together, right? If you're in sales, get your butt out of your seat and start meeting people for lunch and dinners, and because that's where the connection is made. And so, once again, you look at all these things that's happening. Deep down as individuals, we all want to feel loved, recognized, and appreciated, right? Like that it comes down to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so another tactic in the hybrid workplace that I like to use, and I say the same thing on the sales side with my new book, Save Your Asks, it's sending video text messages. And for whatever reason, no one does this, right? And it's the best way to create authentic connection a lot faster. And so I actually have an exercise in my new book that I do where I have people send a video text message if I'm doing like some sort of executive retreat. And people are astounded at people will respond back, whether it be an employee that they've lost touch with to a certain extent, or they haven't had it. It's just not happening digitally and they can't meet face to face, or if it's with a prospect. And you look at, I've been speaking at the world's biggest companies over the last 3 months. All of those relationships have been developed just off of video text messages, right? To where you get to a point where it's like, Chris, we got to have you in, right? I'm like, yeah, totally. Bring it on when you want me to do it, right? Nice. So once again, getting into the tactics of some of the things that we can do, super powerful.
So good. Well, you mentioned about your book, and you got to be careful how you actually say this. Save Your Asks.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So that's fun. And you interviewed like the world's greatest like leaders and entrepreneurs, and this was to give them tools so that they could talk about like the art of courtship. What have people missed now about courtship. And what was something unexpected about your research when doing this book?
So the biggest thing that I'm trying to really catalyze out there is more authentic, genuine connection, right? And if you look at how most sales teams do their processes, they're trained to be an ask call. All right. It's the opposite of genuine connection. They go in for the ask way too early. Look at our LinkedIn, right? People reaching out nonstop. Diane, hey, will you have me on your podcast? I'd love to be a guest, without doing any research. And it's like, what about like, Diane, I love your podcast. I listened to the episode on Tommy and the other one. Like, I love what you're doing. Like, there's none of that. It's people are going in for the ask way too early, and they're overly dependent on digital to get there. And so what if we actually all saved our asks, right? And developed more of that courtship? And that's what I'm really out to help solve. And I think there are some authors and speakers out there that say one thing and practice another. I'm now living my book, and it's gotten so exciting and out of control in the craziest ways when you actually save your asks and you go into these relationships with the only desired outcome being authentic or genuine connection. And so, some of the tactics I talk about, especially in the courtship space, is one of my favorite verbs now is a sales tactic that was introduced to me in 2012. I'm going to ask you a question, Diane, and tell me, have you ever heard of the verb Shawshanking?
Makes me think of the movie.
Okay, perfect. Well, that's exactly what you should think on. So 2012, I had just signed the largest, I was kind of, I was really rooted in the digital and social media space. I'd signed a huge contract with a software startup, the biggest of my life, and this small entrepreneurial companies. And we were at a steak dinner and kind of, with our team celebrating this massive deal. And I was the buyer, and I turned to the entrepreneur and the CEO. His name's Jason Beckerman. And I said, Jason, you and I met in 2007 in a closed Facebook group. And here we are today, having signed the biggest deal of both of our lives. And I'm the buyer, and I'm impossible to pin down. I'm all over the place. How did you do it? He goes, Chris, you really want to know? I was like, yeah. He goes, I Shawshank your ass. I was like, Shawshank? Like the movie? What's that? He goes, if you remember in Shawshank Redemption, Andy Dufresne, in order to get the library funded, what he did was he wrote a letter a week. And he never heard back until 2 years later. He got his first check in the mail for the Shawshank prison for $200 to buy books. But he didn't stop there. He kept going. It was 10 years later when he escaped. They had the nicest library in the whole prison system. Chris, every single week since we met, I've had some sort of touch point with you. It's been on Facebook Messenger. It's been on Instagram message. It's been on text. Not once did I go in for an ask. And now here we are today where we've developed this. And I began I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to make that common vernacular in the hallways. And I'm going to go Shawshank my prospects. And sure enough, after implementing that immediately, I landed a Fortune 50 client. And today there are 120 employees on that one account, all thanks to Shawshanking. And I love that because it's such a great demonstration of saving your asks, right? And I'm not saying never go in for the ask, but save it. Go ahead and provide value along the way and then go in for it.
Nice. That's so cool. I love that because, you think about it, when you start, I think that's part of what's missing in some of the cultures right now is people don't know what's happening with the person next to them. They have no idea what's going on. And I think that's also there's a lot of depression right now. There's a lot of isolation. There's a lot of things that are going on right now because people don't feel like somebody actually cares about what they're doing and what they're up against. So just having those conversations just makes a huge difference.
And the most important question we can ask anyone, this is where I get really fired up and I get goosebumps, teary-eyed. The most important question we can ask anyone is, what's your dream, right? What is your dream? What fires you up? And now, once you get used to asking that question, knowing when to ask it, and I get there pretty quickly. I call it a race to the middle. I find that common passion point, and then I just, I start leaping towards it. And when someone shares that dream with you, when you're on the receiving end of someone truly sharing their dream, which is usually outside of their job, and you do one thing to help them, act as the catalyst towards that. In my case, as a writer and author, I'll get a lot of people whose dream is to write a book. I'm like, well, I'll send you my nonfiction book planner, and that'll establish a first step towards that goal or dream. And, the same is true with trying to really retain talent or even recruit talent. Ask that person at that lunch, what's your dream? Is that being filled here at our organization? And if it's not, let me help be a resource for you towards that, right? And so that to me is the most important question we can ask anyone. And it's magical when you start going there, right? It's absolutely and I'm not saying you just do it for the sake of trying to get something, right? I'll do it. I wrote a blog post of a waiter that I had in Turks. And long story short, this guy, amazing smile. His name's John Lee. We get to a point where I'm like, I'm going to ask the question. And my wife's like, of course you are. And I'm like, John Lee, what's your dream? And he calls me Mr. Chris. He goes, Mr. Chris, I have two dreams. One is to get back to Haiti, where I'm the youngest of 11 kids. I've been back there for 5 years, and see my mom. I want to buy a plane ticket to get back. That's why I'm working 3 jobs. And then my second dream is to come to America and work in hospitality. And then he goes and gets our dessert. And I turn to my wife. I'm like, I'm going to make dream number 1 come true right now. And so he comes back. And she's like, of course you are. Yeah, let's do it. And I said, John Lee, now I'm going to tell you, you can just focus on dream number 2, because I'm going to buy your ticket right now to Haiti. And here's what's cool about that, right? And he balls crying, right? It was like $400, right? And he actually just got back from that trip. He went in September, and we video text or WhatsApp video call every single week. And I wrote a blog post about it. And Candace Nelson, who is a friend of mine, entrepreneur, started Sprinkles Cupcake, has all the stuff. She commented, she was like, I'll bring John Lee to come work for my company. I'll help find the visa. And I'm like, oh my God, look at all these stuff that's happening. Like, and that's what fires me up, right? That's what gets me the most excited, is when I don't need anything in return, but when I can help act as that catalyst for those people around me, then that's where the magic happens. And the same thing, even as you get into the untouchables, right? I would call them, right? The billionaires, the A-list celebrities, whatever it is, you still go there, right? Like you still, once you create that common passion point and then you go to the place of dreams, that's where the magic lives. And so we all need to be doing more of that, right?
Yeah, definitely. Well, Chris, that begs the question, what's your dream?
So it was interesting as I talk to a lot of people, and I talk a lot. I'm massively extroverted, right? And it was actually in one of my conversations with a very famous entrepreneur that lives in Austin now. And I was getting through the gatekeepers to talk to this individual. And I said, kind of off the cuff, I said, one of my biggest dream is to unlock as many dreams in others as possible and be the catalyst to pursuing those. And this very logical person, not empathetic, and I didn't really know him that well, said to me, that's beautiful, right? And so it allowed me to really reorient my purpose, which up until that time, about 7 months ago, was to inspire and connect. And it's been that way for 15 years. It allowed me to create something a little bit more nuanced, but that is my dream. And I want to unlock passions in people. If you want to get to like, what's the future look like? I want to influence humans starting at age 13 to create more of a choose your own adventure that's in line with their passions, interests, and innate talents versus what is happening now, right? We become a dentist because my dad was a dentist, or we went to a certain school because it's socially, maybe we shouldn't even go to college, right? Like, so there's all of if we could actually know ourselves as human beings earlier in life, that's where the magic happens. And so I'm starting to do, and that's essentially what I'm getting now is I go to these big corporations that are having retention issues and, or their sales teams or whatever it is. And it's at dinner after I do my keynote and no one's around that in some cases, these pretty well-known CEOs turn to me, and when no one's looking, they go, "So Chris," I'm like, "Yeah, I got to tell you something." I'm like, "Okay, I have zero passions in my job, and I'm living a largely inauthentic life in that I'm very different at work than I am at home and with my friends. Where do I start?" Right? It's clean up on aisle age 55 to 60, right?
Yep.
And I'm like, well, and you dissect it. How did you get into this? Right? How did you even, like, where are all those dreams you neglected along the way? Let's start revisiting those things. Right. And then I get fired up again. But I'm like, what if we could actually get ahead of it? That's my ultimate dream.
Right.
I want to change the world.
I love it. Well, your energy alone just is like, yeah, let's do it. Let's happen. It's so
I got
great.
2 hours of sleep coming back from LA last night too. So it's like,
it's so good.
Yeah.
So what do you do for people who like either have not identified their passion or they're just not really passionate? They're kind of punching the clock and they just kind of need a kick in the ass.
Yeah. So it's my Google Me exercise. So this is a great one for anyone listening. My Google Me exercise is treat yourself like a Google search engine. And I want you to write down 20 to 30 things that people go to you for advice. What are they typing in your Google search bar? And I want that actually you get fired up about answering. And so like dissecting me, for example, it's being the father of 2 daughters. It's big green egg grilling recipes. It's learning how to kiteboard. It's how to build a business out of a book, how to write a book. It's all of these things. And so the first challenge is come up with all those things. That's going to create essentially this whole system of passions that you are influential on, whether you care to admit it or not. Okay. And then if I were to challenge you out of that list over the next year, you've got to either create a podcast or write a book on one of those things. Which do you have enough interest, passion, and tenacity to go after? Which one of those things is it going to be? Because that's going to actually put you to the place of where it is you need to focus your efforts to curate a side hustle or some sort of pursuit in that area.
Yeah, that's so good. It's funny when you were talking about like, just doing what your parents are directing you to do. And I can remember when I was going to college, my dad said, "Are you going to be a doctor or a lawyer?" Like that was my only 2 choices. And I'm like, well, I don't really like medicine. I'll go into law. And I started getting like a degree in law. And then I started like doing some of that work. And I'm like, oh, this is like boring. Like, I don't want to do this. Like this is not going to work for me. And then I had guys that were graduating, they were going into law enforcement. So I took the test and that's how I fell into like law enforcement. But even doing that alone, it was more of like the undercover work that I did. I mean, I was an undercover prostitute hunting a serial killer. And it was like, once I retired out of that, I'm like, where does that transition into the next like passion life, what that looks like? And what I found is people were always asking stories about what the hell was like undercover, like what was that all about? And I realized that it was really about trusting your intuition and having that confidence and moving forward. And that translated into doing my podcast, doing consulting, doing these different things. So I feel like there's like, even if you're in something that isn't necessarily exactly what you're doing, there's something in that launches you to the next thing.
100%. And it actually didn't make the book because it got confusing according to my editor. But I like to look at it as like if you look at if you look at the oceanography of the world, you look at that space between the US and Europe, there's the jet stream, right? And then off of that jet stream, what you'll find is there are these jetties, right? Or these eddies off of it, right? These swirls. Yep. And one of the things that I like that's the best metaphor for that jet stream in your life, that's your currency. Your currency is that thing that you get paid to do, right? So in my application, I was the digital and social media guy, one of the first guys to work with Zuck in 2006, right? That was my currency. But what I realized when I hit my rock bottom in 2016 was like, I'm no longer really passionate about these things. And so that's what was the trigger for me to actually start pursuing some of these passions of mine. And the biggest of which in this case was creating a work culture where younger employees could thrive. And I then, it was actually Tommy Breedlove that was the catalyst for it. When I introduced myself on an executive men's retreat with 14 of us in North Georgia, I said, I don't know what I do anymore, but I'm kind of like the millennial whisperer. Tommy kicks me at the fire afterwards. He goes, you got to write that book. And I wrote it pretty quickly. And then it went on to sell 100,000 copies. And soon enough, I looked at like my currency had very quickly been replaced by one of these other currents, right? And so it's imperative that as humans, that we are always flexing new currencies with these kind of eddies on the side, so we can potentially displace that currency that we may not be passionate about anymore, because our passions evolve as humans, right? Just with life. And the same thing is also with, you got to be responsible about it, right? I get people that reach out to me and say, I'm going to quit my job in X to then do X. I'm like, no. You got to be a little bit more patient, and you got kids, like, don't do that, right? That's just a midlife crisis. Be deliberate about it and start curating these things on the side.
Yeah, so good. Well, it reminds me, one of my favorite things to ask, especially since you just got back home, is, we create the lifestyle we want to have. We create the environments we want to have. We live differently in our bedroom versus our kitchen or office. What's your favorite room in your home and why?
My favorite room is probably our family area. We have this huge, I live like in a mountain house almost in the middle of the woods in Atlanta, right? It's counterintuitive, but we have this big room with exposed beams and a TV and a big fireplace. And every single morning, I'll actually light a fire at 4:30 in the morning this time of year. And that's where I start my day. But it's also where I really connect with both my wife and my two daughters who are 10 and 12. And, we'll move everything around and do our game night there. Like, that to me is, you're looking out kind of on all this like amazing nature around us. And that to me that's my favorite spot by far.
That's so cool. I love it. So speaking of creating things, you have a book ritual. I'd love for you to share about that, how you anchor things in when you read.
Yeah. I mean, wait, which one is that?
The one about with music and like,
yeah. Time stamping my life.
Yeah.
So one of the things I notice as a human is that even if you take your rock bottom moments, when you're going through them, they feel very dark and horrible, right? And I think part of this is just how I'm wired, but I'll always look back on those moments and be like, you know what, I kind of have fond memories of it. And so I'm obsessed with development and progress, right? And so I wanted to figure out a way how I could timestamp my whole life so that I could revisit memories without looking at like Instagram. And so what I found was that with smells, right, it's the fastest way to your brain memory than any other like sense. And so I'll actually I spend like $300 a month on candles and scents. And I kind of go through, it's Le Labo right now. I'm going through a lot of Le Labo stuff. I have my fall scents, I have my winter scents, I have my spring scents, but I will actually timestamp month to month candles and smells with music and books. And what happens is that when that month is done, I'll take that candle or that perfume and put it up on my memory sill, and then I'll go on to the next. Okay. And I also pair it with music that's usually a little bit ahead of whatever season it is that I'm going into. Right. So now I'm transitioning into the winter season. So it's like much more like Dave Brubeck and Band of Horses and Pine Grove. It's much slower. Right. Mm-hmm. But then my smells follow that. And then I'll also pair in books along the way. And so it's this amazing thing that happens where I remember I turned to my wife at the height of about to publish my first book, which is a very vulnerable, tough period. No matter any author you talk to, right before they publish, they hit this weird rock bottom, right? And I turned to her with tears in my eyes. I was like, do you think I'll ever write another book and I'll have fond memories of this? She's like, Chris, you probably will. And, sure enough, I was listening to, it was actually Pine Grove at the time. And I had a Le Labo candle and fragrance that I was wearing. And I revisited it just 4 months later, and I smelled the candle and I yelled down to my wife. I was like, honey, they're good memories already. Like, oh my God, they're good. Like, I actually have fond memories of that thing. I might have to write another book, right? So it's such a great tactic that I think is this kind of beautiful thing that we don't necessarily, and I'm not saying you have to buy super expensive fragrances, right? Like, just do something that
Right.
can help get you there.
Nice. I love it. So when people are reading your books, what is the best pairing song to go with them?
It totally depends on the book and the season, right? So, I mean, for me, I'm always anticipating that next season, right? So, springtime, it's heavy reggae. Summertime, it's actually late summer, or even like midsummer, I'm already transitioning into fall music. But I really have two seasons of music, like super upbeat, and then chill, right? So, for me, if you were to look at the books, the Millennial Whisper is a little bit more chill, and Save Your Asks is more upbeat and reggae-ish, right? Like or like some of the electronic or like, get hyped up running music stuff.
Yeah, love it. So good. So Chris, what's the 70-30 rule?
So before I get to the 70-30 rule, I talk about from a generational standpoint, why is it that so many of these young people are leaving our organizations? Right. And it's because most likely their passions aren't being met and there's an expectations that will happen. And so I tell a story to demonstrate my 70-30 rule when people join my team. And I say, I'm going to tell you the most embarrassing story of my life. And they kind of perk up. They're like, okay, Chris. I say, okay, I was in Sun Valley, Idaho, and I hired a fishing guide. And I turned to the fishing guide and I said, listen, I don't even like to fish. I don't care if I catch the fish, like, doesn't even matter. I want 2 Instagram shots. I want one of like the net behind the fish. And I was like, have you ever seen River Runs Through It with Brad Pitt? And he looks at me like disgusted. He's like, yeah. I go, okay, I want like the shot of me in the river with the river going by and the mountains in the background. And then that's it. And he's disgusted, right? He looks at me, he goes, you're going to spend $600 on an Instagram post? I'm like, no, that's 2 Instagram posts, 300 each. Let's go. And what happens is this Pinterestation of life, right? Wherever we think that this perfection exists everywhere. And I tell that story of being like, well, I want to introduce you to my 70-30 rule, which is the fact that 30% of your job and life is just going to suck, right? And 70%, it's my job in what you do on a day-to-day basis. It's up to me to make sure that 70% of that is in line with your passions and what you want to do. But 30% is going to suck. So on your first week, I will have you put your job description and put in what's in your 70% zone of excellence and what's in your 30% zone of suck. And what happens is it helps get rid of this mentality that the grass is always greener on the other side. And when you're going through, for me, it's Excel. My 30% zone of suck is like Excel, budgeting, nitty gritty stuff, minutia. And so when I'm doing that even myself, I'm like, I just got to get through the other side to get to the 70. And so what's interesting though, data wise, this just came out in the Wall Street Journal. You're finding that people that left their jobs at the height of the pandemic, a lot of them are boomeranging back because they're like, actually, this isn't really what I thought it was going to be, right? And so you're seeing 4% of those people that quit starting to come back, and it's starting to increase. And so that's my 70-30 rule.
Love it. That's so good. I mean, I could talk to you all day. I love your energy. I love to see your passion. I just love all the things that you're talking about. And I know that our listeners are going to want to stay in contact with you. How can they best do that?
The best place is actually on Instagram at TUFF22. That's the best place to connect with me. And then you can also reach out to me on LinkedIn / Christopher Tuff. And my website is Chris Tuff, CHRISTUFF.me. And then all my stuff is listed there.
Awesome. Well, as you know, our theme for this season is creating freedom. So in what ways are you creating freedom in your life today?
So for me, freedom lies in where passion, purpose, and profession all overlap. And, I think a lot of people like to talk a big game and then they don't walk it. And authenticity is super important to me. And so I actually quit my job, and I don't even know if I've announced this to anyone. I don't know when this will air, but I quit my job after I went out to fulfill one of my dreams to surf at Kelly Slater Surf Ranch. And it was this life-changing moment with the most amazing group of giving people that happened in that pool that I came back and I quit my job. And the life, what freedom for me looks like is the one that I'm doing right now, which is, and it's really scary. I'm not going to lie, right? Like I'm super confident for 2 days. And then every third day, I question whether or not I'm going to be able to pull it off, right? Can I make ends meet for my kids and family? And I'm figuring it out as I go. But freedom for me is where work doesn't feel like work, and where passion, purpose, and profession collide. And, whether it be talking to you or even, I just got back from Kelly Slater Surf Ranch again, where I was over the last 2 days. Like, how awesome is it that this is work? And I want to inspire more of that freedom for others, but I got to practice what I preach first. And that's what's unfolding now.
So exciting. I love that you just literally jumped off the deep end and you're just going for it, right? And you're living in that passion zone and you're making that happen. And I just want to thank you. I know you just got back from your flight, of just taking the time and sharing your wisdom and your passion with us here today.
Absolutely. Anyone reach out to me if you have individual questions. I'm very responsive, and thank you for the opportunity to impact some lives.
Perfect. Love it. Thanks again, Chris. And to our listeners out there, if you're living in the 30% zone and you're not having that passion, listen to this again, find out what it is that ignites you, share this with those who you think just need to have that little kick, and, make sure that you are really getting clear on what it is. Life is short, right? And you got to make sure that you're passionate, you're loving life, you're doing what you're doing. And until we connect again, live your spa life. Bye for now. Bye-bye.
I love it.